Welcome, Magnus here, and I finally had a chance to test out the R5 as much as I possibly could before I had to send it back to Canon. These tests I did are focused on video. Now there are a lot of videos out there that focus on mostly the overheating for video purposes, but don't seem to give you a realistic approach to what the camera actually performs like in real shooting scenarios. You see, it's not just about overheating. It's about what this camera can do while you're out there filming. I will say this one thing though. After testing this camera, I will never worry about overheating, and I'm happy to use this camera for video over the A7S III. Want to know why? Watch this video and you'll see. Before I forget, subscribe if you haven't already to my channel and hit that like button if you'd like to see more of my future videos regarding camera tests and news, specifically for video. Anyway, now let's get started. I had the Canon R5 for about a week. Canon sent me an R5 to try, and I was super excited to put that camera through its paces as much as I possibly could in the short time I had it. I still am waiting for my pre-order of the R5, but these tests are what I was able to do in the short amount of time it was with me. To be a bit organized, more than I usually am, we'll break down my tests into different categories. Vlogging with this camera, filming a real-life video shoot, then a quick photo experience. From there, we'll move into comparing the sharpness in 4K of the video files in the Canon R5 to the Canon 5D Mark IV and the Samsung NX1, reviewing the actual video file sizes and what you can do with the card slots, and then finally, to cap it off, an overheating test, just like everyone else has. Disclaimer, I used firmware 1.1.0 for these tests, and these tests are how the camera worked for me and my workflow. I'm sure results may vary, so please take that into consideration. Now on to the first test, vlogging with the camera. I was excited to take the R5 out for a quick hike on the weekend I had with it, with temperatures in the mid-80s Fahrenheit. I decided to go into this vlog with the following mentality. I would record as if the camera didn't have overheating limitations. I took one 512GB SanDisk Extreme Pro UHS 1 SD card and a 64GB CF Express card. I had overheating limitations in my head. I knew that memory card limitations would take precedence due to the card's small file size. I made a conscious decision to record 4K 120 only to the CF Express card and 4K HQ onto an SD card. That way, I only recorded to the CF Express card when absolutely necessary. When I began shooting, I was immediately pleased. Welcome. I'm out in the woods, out seeing waterfalls and nice settings. I'm recording this 4K HQ to my SD card, my SanDisk Extreme Pro UHS 1 card. The interesting thing about this is that I'm testing to see if eye detect mode still works while wearing a mask, but so far the look, the handling, the nice pictures I've been able to get, super excited, and the stabilization has made it so that I don't have to carry my gimbal around too often, which I was doing a lot. And the full frame 4K makes it so that I can use my 24-70 lens without being like this close to the camera. I can actually be out here and be fully comfortable with it. So let's continue. See ya. Filming full frame 4K that is incredibly sharp to a Canon camera with IBIS and a flip screen was something I've been waiting a long time for. I did record a moment of 8K but quickly stopped because I wanted to conserve memory card space. And looking at the footage of what I recorded, I'm glad I stuck to 4K. So here's my opinion of the experience. Shooting that day, I filmed easily by just hitting record and getting what I wanted. Whenever I didn't need the camera, I would just turn it off, but that's how I normally operate anyway, so that I may conserve battery life. So I just vlogged, took pictures, filmed what I wanted to film, and that's it. Not a single issue with the camera while filming. I never had to turn on standard when compared to HQ. I never even received an overheating warning. And in fact, the camera never ran out of battery. I brought 3 spares with me, but it worked all day on the first battery. So for me, the R5 is wonderful for vlogging. Were there any issues? Yeah, it's not perfect, but it was damn good. The first nuisance that I had, which is mostly my fault, is that whenever I wanted slow-mo, I would switch the card to the CF Express card, and the interface to do that was a bit cumbersome. Most of the changes were available in the quick menu, but it is still quite a few clicks before you can be up and running. The biggest nuisance about that was first you'd have to turn HQ mode off, then go in to change your frame rate settings. If you leave HQ mode on, it won't let you choose high frame rate mode. But before you can switch to high frame rate mode, you had to switch to CF Express card. It won't let you change that setting before you switch the card. More on this later. The second nuisance was after I brought the footage back, I noticed a bit of jello effect with wobbly footage because I had IBIS on. That was to be expected, of course, as IBIS really isn't meant to be a replacement for a gimbal, and it is better than having no IS at all. I used my 24-70 f2.8 Canon lens on this vlog, and it's absolutely awesome to be able to vlog with this lens. The lens has no image stabilization built in internally, so it's a nice bonus with the R5. Here are a few shots with and without a gimbal that I took with the R5 and a shot with the 5D Mark IV, just so you can see that internal stabilization can't replace a gimbal for this camera. In any case, vlogging is doable on the R5 for me with no issue. Next test, filming a real live video shoot. If you don't know, I also have a much smaller gaming channel on YouTube. I sometimes like to write scripts on the channel and film with a green screen. So it's a full production and it's fun to do. So first, let me show you 2 clips. One of these clips was shot with the 5D Mark IV in 4K. The other was shot with the R5 in 4K HQ. Can you tell the difference? I'll be honest, they don't look much different to me. So why would I care about shooting in 4K HQ? Did it matter to me? Yes. I film using a green screen. When keying green screen, the higher the resolution and the more detailed your image, the easier it is to key the green and get a clean looking footage. The R5 in HQ mode made it really simple to process this key. 5D Mark IV is great too and pretty simple, but the R5's increased detail made it just a tad easier, and it really helps with the setup's flexibility. Also, in my studio, the temperature was about 85 degrees thanks to the really hot 500 watt lights that are pointed right at me with no ventilation. So how did the R5 do? Well, in HQ 24 frames per second 4K, no overheating at all. I didn't even get the warning signal. I just treated my setup as if I was shooting with the 5D, meaning no concern for overheating. I even connected the camera to HDMI so I could use a monitor to see my filming. You see, the flip screen would have worked just fine, but part of my setup required me to put my script next to the camera, which would block the view of the screen. So it was okay. All in all, a great shoot with no overheating concerns. Once again, if you're ever considering a long shoot with this camera in 4K, here's what I suggest. Record in 4K HQ as much as possible. Should the overheating warning ever come on, try to find a moment where you can stop recording in 4K HQ and switch to 4K standard. Proceed from there and you should be fine. If you're recording in higher frame rates than 30 frames per second in 4K or higher resolution, then definitely take the time limits seriously. In conclusion, for filming on this shoot, camera succeeds again. Basically. Up next, a quick photo experience with the camera. I took the camera out for a quick photo shoot of a couple of party design specialists that was booked for that weekend. There's tons that could be said about this camera, but let's get right to the point. I took my 6D and the R5 to the shoot. I didn't have the 5D Mark IV because Canon had it for repairs, so the 6D was the only full-frame DSLR available to me. When taking pictures with the DSLR, I'm used to settings, buttons, and how to take the pictures. I'm used to the camera and it's definitely easy to get the picture I wanted. With the R5, however, it honestly makes you forget that you sometimes struggle with other cameras to get the settings that you want. The R5 just works and takes great pictures and is a real pleasure to use. That's all that needs to be said, and don't even get me started on how great the autofocus is. R5 is a great photo camera, period. No discussion about that. Now let's look at sharpness in 4K modes only. We all know 8K video would be the best sharpness when it comes to any camera with lower resolution, when you compare it at least. Now I've done a comparison in the past with the 5D Mark IV NX1 and the Panasonic GH5. In that test, the Samsung NX1 was the winner, which I mostly attributed to the fact that the NX1 is using the full 6.5K sensor and downsampling to 4K, giving you the sharpest results. Now that's why I decided to invite the current sharpness champion, the NX1, and put it against the 5D Mark IV's 4K and the two 4K modes of the R5. After these tests, I believe we have a new sharpness king. Also note that my recordings with the 5D were done after I had already shipped the R5 back. Canon was working on repairing my R5 as I stated before, so I had to wait until I received it back before recording again. Also, I placed all the cameras in exactly the same distance from me at 24mm full frame equivalent settings. So the Samsung NX1 has a 1.5 times crop, so it was 16mm. 5D Mark IV was set at just under 14mm because of its crop. And the full frame R5 was 24mm. Now let me be clear here with my opinion. Just because an image is sharper doesn't necessarily make it a better overall image. The quality of what you record on the sensor takes into account many attributes, not just sharpness. I also believe that a somewhat softer image can be a benefit rather than a detriment. But if you want sharper, without a doubt, the R5 with its downsampled 8K image is the sharpness king. Coming in second place is the former champion, the Samsung NX1, thanks to its image that is downsampled from the 6.5K sensor. Third place goes to the 5D Mark IV. Its 4K is actually doing a 1-to-1 pixel readout of the center of the full frame center, which means that the 4K video is cropping in on the center about 1.74 times. So it makes sense a non-downsampled image shouldn't look better than an image that's downsampled from a higher resolution. And finally, in last place, is the R5 standard 4K, which is a line-skipped 4K image. Basically, it's reading every other line of pixels in the sensor. It's still a true 4K image, but it noticeably reduces the clarity when compared to the 4K HQ mode. So basically, the R5 is both the best and the worst in 4K in this comparison. My opinion, though, is that it's absolutely ridiculous to zoom in this much to see the difference. I actually had to carefully look and stare at the rendered video to differentiate which is which. Are you ever going to zoom in 500% on your footage? If you regularly do, then sure, R5 HQ is the best. But if you're not able to do a one-on-one like me, then any of these cameras in 4K is just fine. You don't need to compare. Moving on, let's go to the video files themselves. I will admit right away, I didn't really test the video files of 1080p in the camera. I was so concerned with getting all of my tests in the 4K footage or higher that I completely left that out, and now I don't have the camera anymore. When my R5 that I purchased finally comes in, I'll definitely test that out too. So I found something interesting when testing the recording modes of the camera. On the SD card, you're able to record 4K HQ in up to 30 frames per second. If you want higher frame rates or higher resolution, you must record on the CF Express card. I found that a bit disappointing and actually very weird. Why? Well, let me explain. Now, when checking the bit rate at 4K 120 frames per second, it's also about 470 megabits per second, meaning that the necessary write for these video files is possible on the SD card, but Canon has restricted you to only use the CF Express cards to write the higher frame rate files. This is a bit unfair because it's certainly possible to record at the bit rate necessary for 4K slow-mo, but Canon doesn't want you doing it. And with CF Express cards being so expensive, it's a shame that we're forced to fork over so much money just to have the ability to record in this mode. Here's another problem. I purchased the 64GB CF Express card hoping that I could get more than a few seconds of 8K RAW footage. But no, the camera just stops recording. And that card cost me $160. So ouch. My point is that Canon should have just let you try recording in all modes, and if your slot wasn't fast enough, then just stop the file like the CF Express card slot does. Now, speaking of the files, I also want you to keep this in mind. Working with the files can be a simple process or a total nightmare, depending on your recording mode. Here's an explanation of a few file types that the camera uses just in case it's not evident right away when using the camera. All I is better quality than IPB. I never touched IPB mode on the camera, so again, I'll test more when I actually have the camera in hand. 4K 30 frames per second in standard or HQ mode are recorded in 8-bit 420 with an H.264 codec. What this means is that your computer should have an easier time reading these files than with the next modes that I'm going to get into. I think I'd end up shooting this most of the time anyway, and that H.264 codec is not too intensive or on an editing system. Now next up, if you switch to Canon log, the R5 will then record in 10-bit 422 with the H.265 codec. This is where your computer should start to struggle. H.265 is a more processor-intensive codec, but the advantage is you get higher quality footage at a lower bitrate. I was still able to edit the footage on my computer, but it slowed it down significantly. 8K All-I footage also uses the H.265 codec for efficiency, but the color depth is still 8-bit 420 unless you enable Canon log recording. Once you enable Canon log, you record the 10-bit 422 files. These files will have your computer crawl, or at least mine did, but I've also heard that heftier computers can struggle as well. And finally, you have the 8K RAW video files. These files give you the flexibility of adjusting your exposure and white balance in post without destroying your video file's integrity. Now, I could only get my card to record about 6 seconds of raw video before it totally crapped out on me and stopped. But all I can comfortably say at this point is that until Canon releases a lighter, easier to work with raw video file, I'll probably steer clear of recording raw. As a bonus tip, I will say that DaVinci Resolve did a much better and faster job of reading and working with my raw video files than Adobe Premiere could. But that's keeping in mind that my video card is too old to take advantage of some of Adobe Premiere's latest features that offloads a lot of the work on the video card from the processor. At least for me, DaVinci Resolve wins. So to sum up this point, this camera is expensive, and so will be the memory cards that you have to buy to take full advantage of the R5. Don't get me started on the computer you need. I'll update this section once Canon updates their firmware with improved bit rates and once I actually get my camera. And finally, we get to the overheating test. To be honest, after everything I've tested with this camera, I thought that having a silly, unrealistic overheating test that has been done to death on the internet was a bit unnecessary. But for my own sake, and for you guys, I figured let's squeeze it in. First test and most important test for me was to do the 4K 24 frames per second HQ mode. How long I could get into this recording time before it overheats? So I set up the camera just recording my screen at a distance and hit record. Every 30 minutes I hit record again, even though the camera started off with telling me I could only do 25 minutes of 4K HQ. I actually ended up recording about an hour and a half. I didn't get any warning after all that time either. The only reason I stopped recording is because I wasn't about to waste my entire day in this one mode, and honestly, I was more than pleased. Then next, I tried 4K 60 frames per second after letting the camera cool down for a bit. I got a little bit less than half hour before the camera stopped recording. But keep in mind, I had to delete all my footage from the CF Express card over and over again and hit record over and over again because my card would fill up repeatedly before the timer ran out. From there, I didn't do anything anymore. No more overheating tests. Why? Because it seems that the camera's higher frame rate modes and higher resolution modes do cause the camera to do overheat warnings and shut down in advertised times. It's just the HQ 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second that really go above and beyond what we're told. Let me sum up the overheating with this point. For the entire week of filming and using the camera as I desired, the only time I ever saw the overheat warning was when I pushed the camera for the sole purpose of getting it to overheat. Sure, I was limited by CF Express memory card space, but when it came to actually recording vlogs or professional shoots, not even that memory card limitations restricted me from getting what I needed. And that's my point. This camera did it all. It's just expensive to maintain. Keep that in mind. Wow, thank you for hanging in with me until the end of this video. So what do you think of the R5? Well, I literally get the feeling that it will be my workhorse camera when I finally receive it. It's an incredible camera for my video needs, and I look forward to getting my hands on it. So what future tests would you like me to do? Let me know, and once again, thank you to the community for watching my videos, commenting, and always make my day when you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. Whew. See you guys next time. Take care.